Alrighty, we mentioned earlier in the Torah service, our Parasha this week is entitled Shelach Lecha, and of course it means sing for yourself. The Torah portion was from Numbers 13, verse 1, and Numbers 15:41. Our Haftarah portion this week, our prophets came from the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verse 1 to verse 24, and our Chadasha portion was taken out of the book of Hebrews, chapter 3, verse 7, and chapter 4, verse 11. I got a little story I just want to tell you. I read it and I thought it was very cute. And it was a pious Jewish man, and he had come to the age of 105 years old. And he was a regular synagogue attender and everything. He was one of the ones they could always count on for the morning meeting and stuff. Well, all of a sudden he stopped going to synagogue. And the people of the synagogue got alarmed because he was absent for so many years. He was a faithful attendant, and now he's absent. So the rabbi went to see him. And he found him, he was in excellent health. So the rabbi asked him, how come after all these years we don't see you at services anymore? And the old man looked around and he lowered his voice and he says, well, I tell you, Rabbi, when I got to be 90, I expected God to take me any day. But then I got to be 95. Then 100. Now 105. So I figured that God was very busy and must have forgotten about me. And so I don't want him to be reminded where I'm at. Anyway, yeah, he's not ready to go. This week's Parasha that we read this week, it has to do with how do we see the promised land that God has given us. Now we see through the story of the spies that Moses sent into the promised land that 2 reports came back. And in truth, it's 2 visions came back. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. What will we see? Will we see, as God does, the blessing of a good and bountiful land ready for settling? Or will one only see through his human eyes an insurmountable goal because of the inadequacies of one surveying the land? In other words, when we look at the land through the eyes that God has spoken to us about, and you notice God spoke of the land in the past tense. I will give you the land. It's not I'm going to give you the land. It's I will give you the land. That's past tense. That means it's already a done deal. So when we look upon the land, do we see it as something we've acquired, that it's already ours, or do we look at it with our own eyes and our own strength and our own frailties and we say, wow, ain't no way I'm making that. How are we looking at the land that God has given us? And then the second question that comes from this parasha is, you notice God has done this and allowed this as a test. For him. Why would God allow us to test him? Interesting. So our parasha opens up with God commanding Moses to send a representative from all 12 tribes to spy out the land of Canaan, because he desires that the Israelites be prepared before, and mentally especially, before they actually enter in and conquer the land, because they see the bounty and the beauty of all that God has promised them firsthand. They will understand and believe the promises of God and give them confidence and faith to be able to follow God into the land and become his people. But what we find is that as they set out to walk this land, they're expectant and confident. As we find in Numbers 13, verses 1 through 2, and skip down to verses 26 and 27. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, send some men on your behalf to investigate the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to Bnei Yisrael. Each man you are to send will be a prince of the tribe of his fathers, a man from each tribe. And so according to the word of Adonai, Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All the men were princes of Bnei Yisrael. And they returned from investigating the land after 40 days. And they traveled and returned to Moses, Aaron, and the entire community of Bnei Yisrael at Kadesh. in the wilderness of Paran. And they gave their report to them and the entire assembly. And they showed the land's fruit. They gave their account to him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and indeed it is flowing with milk and honey. This is some of the fruit. Now we all remember it states in the scriptures that they cut a cluster of grapes down that was so large they had to tie it to a stick and carry it between two men. Think about all the wine and jelly you could make out of that. God had proven once again the trustworthiness of his word. But then the line of their sight changed, and no longer were they excited and confident, but fearful and rebellious, as they saw the inhabitants of the land as greater than themselves, with their walled cities and massive bodies, they compared themselves to grasshoppers against those who lived in the land. And because of their fearful report, the entirety of the children of Israel were infected with this fear and rebellion and grumbling against the Lord and his anointing ran through the camp. The claim that Adonai had only brought them out in order to destroy them when they would have been much more comfortable to have perished in bondage in Egypt. We find this in Numbers 13, 28 through 29, 31 through 33, and chapter 14, 1 through 4. We pick up at verse 28. Except the people living in the land are powerful, and their cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the sons of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites are living in the mountains, and the Canaanites are living in the sea and along the bank of the Jordan. Pick up again in verse 31. But the men who had gone up with them said, we cannot attack these people because they are stronger than we. They spread among Bnei Israel a bad report about the land that they had explored, saying, the land through which we passed to explore devours its residents. All the people we saw there were men of great size. We also saw there the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who are from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes, as well as theirs. Continuing in chapter 14, verse 1, and all through the night, the entire community raised up their voices. The people wept. All Bnei Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole community said, if only we had died in Egypt. If only we had died in this wilderness. Why is Adonai bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will be like plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? And they said to each other, let us choose a leader and let's go back to Egypt. Imagine the audacity of these spies to begin with, to make such statements before Adonai, who is still amongst them in presence, and also not remembering the very acts that they personally witnessed Adonai do for them in Egypt. How he brought them out of the land of Egypt through the mighty plagues. How they crossed the Sea of Reeds, dry shod. How he devoured the entire army of the Egyptian nation in one swell swoop. No more will they see the same people again. He made water come out of a rock for them. And yet, they doubt their ability to go and take a land that is not even as powerful as the nation of Egypt. They doubt the very God who has been with them step by step. But not only does the fear and the attitude of the spies audacious, but now they have run this fear through the entire camp, causing all of the children of Israel to sin and rebel before God. Now, we have to ask ourselves, how do you think Adonai felt when those whom he had personally delivered desired death in Egypt over freedom in him? Basically, that's what they're saying. I'd rather be dead in Egypt than be with God. Really? You'd rather be making bricks for Pharaoh? Being crushed under stones? than being a free man under God? It's ludicrous, don't you think? I mean, totally ludicrous, the attitude. But you got to understand, that's our human nature. That's our human nature. That's when we haven't allowed the Spirit of God to work in us to change our nature. When we still cling to that which is ours, we only see in the natural. We never see the supernatural. We never see the full promise of God because we're too busy looking at the hazards along the way. Now, God never promised them a rose garden out there. And even a rose garden has thorns. And yet, they would prefer bondage in Egypt. But God does not abandon. We find 2 of the spies, 2 out of 12, whose hearts were right before God, whose spirits were in sync with God, who didn't see with their natural eyes, but saw through the glory of the Lord they were following. And that's Caleb and Joshua. And you imagine, these 2 represent the tribes of Ephraim and Judah. In fact, Caleb wasn't even a natural-born Jew. He was a convert to Judaism. But they intercede for the nation, reminding the people of the truthfulness of God's description of the land, how it was full of the flowing milk and honey, the bountifulness of the fruit of the land, and how that the mighty works of God had shown them and brought them safe thus far. Would he not complete what he had started with them? Was he not so short that he couldn't finish what he had commanded? If he was, then he's not God. Numbers 14, 5 through 10. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the entire assembly of the community of Bnei Israel. And Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. They said to the whole assembly of Bnei Israel, the land through which we pass is an exceptionally good land. And if Adonai is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, and he will give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Only don't rebel against Adonai. Don't be afraid of the people of the land. They will be food for us. The protection over them is gone. Adonai is with us. Do not fear them. But the whole assembly talked about violently stoning them. Then the glory of Adonai appeared at the tent of meeting to all of Bnei Israel. See, it wasn't enough to quell the already set fear and rebellion in the hearts of those Israelites and God's anger burning against them, desiring to destroy them for their real because of their unbelief and ungratefulness for all that Adonai had done for them. But Moses was able to convince Adonai that such an action would cause the world to look upon Adonai as unable to fulfill the promise of bringing them into the land. So it was his reputation he would be guarding by not destroying them, not theirs. As God said, whereupon he would slaughter them. That's what he said about the children of Israel. But instead, Adonai would make them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that generation of the spies had perished from age, and then bringing the very children into the land that they were possessed, as that they had accused him of desiring to be sought as plunder for the enemy. They would possess the land and steal. Would he still grant these Israelites forgiveness? There's a question. For their rebellion? Yes. But they still would have to endure the consequence for their rebellion, death in the wilderness, and the loss of the privilege to live in the land of promise. Numbers 14, 20 through 24. And Adonai answered, I have forgiven them, just as you have spoken. But as certainly as I live, and as certainly as the glory of Adonai fills the entire earth, none of the people who saw my glory and my miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet tested me these 10 times and did not obey my voice, not one of them will see the land I promised to their forefathers. None of those who treated me with contempt will see it. However, my servant Caleb, because a different spirit is with him, and he is wholeheartedly behind me, I will bring him into the land where he went. His offspring will inherit it. In Numbers 14:30-35, none of you will enter the land about which I lifted my hand to make home for you, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children, whom you said would be like plunder, I will bring them in, and they will experience the land that you spurned. But your bodies will drop in this wilderness. Your children will become herdsmen in the wilderness for 40 years. They will suffer because of your unfaithfulness until your corpses are consumed in the wilderness. For 40 years, corresponding to the number of the 40 days you explored the land, 1 year each day. You will suffer for your iniquities and know my hostility. I, Adonai, have spoken, and certainly will I do this to all this wicked community banding together against me. In this wilderness they will meet their end, and they will die. Wait a minute. What was it that brought this upon these Israelites? They were a 3-day journey into the land. They could have been in the land in 3 days, possessing it. 3 days. But instead, they wandered for 40 years and never set foot once in it. Why? Their vision. If they had been like Caleb and Joshua and looked at things through the lens of God, through the faith that one should have in God, being confident of His ability, being confident in who He is, victory would have been their declaration instead of comparing themselves to grasshoppers against the inhabitants of the land. What prevents any of us from reaching our promised land in God is our view of the land in which He has placed before us, the one in which He allows us to spy it out. Our journey may seem as though it continues through impossible odds, unscalable heights, and yet God has commanded us to do it. And if God has commanded us to do it, will He not fulfill it? Will He not see to it Himself? It is not us that fulfill anything. It's God through us that fulfills everything. As it says, it is not our power that gives us the strength to do things in God. It is the power of the Spirit of the Lord that lives within us that enables us to overcome any and all things. That is the truth. And the problem with the Israelites in the wilderness was, though the Spirit of the living God was right there in their midst, full access to them, they failed to see it because they looked at themselves. That's one of the biggest deceptions that the enemy has over everyone in the body of the Messiah. I can't do this. Why can't you do this? Because I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't have enough money. I have a bad twitch. It made no difference. If God has called you to do it, if God has called you forth to be in His kingdom, that means He has given you the right, the power, the justification, the sanctification, and the ability to go where He has told you to tread and to trod everything under your foot that He has told you to put under you. And the only thing that stopped you is you taking that, believing it, looking at it, not at the things, and walking forward, putting your hand to the plow, not looking back, and letting someone else come behind you to plant, another one to water, and another one to harvest. Our journey through the wilderness is just as filled with tests and trials that stretch our faith and mature us into being that nation that will conquer all the land for Adonai and His glory. But if we only focus on the things with our natural eyes, we become blinded to the truth of who we are in God, and it is not us who really takes the land, but it's the Spirit of God who does. And therefore we should not lack, doubt or submit ourselves to fear. But set our minds to accomplish what God has done for us. Just as the Apostle John reminds us in 1 John 4:4, you are from God, children, and you have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in this world. Therefore, despite how inadequate we may imagine ourselves to be, in fact, we might physically be inadequate to do these things. In fact, God likes to use things that are inadequate. Why? Because then you can't receive no glory out of it. You can't make no claim to it. Only one who can claim the victory in that, the glory in that, and the praise that should come from that is God Almighty. And that's who deserves it anyway. It's not us that will be seen, but the image of our awesome God and Savior Yeshua. Look at the example with the Haftarah portion in Joshua. Though the spies were not convinced of the fear of the citizens of Jericho, because of the knowledge of God's power and the Israelites, Rahab the prostitute, she looks, she sees, risk her own life because she understands that God has given them over to his people. She understands it. She's not even an Israelite. She understands it. She was assured of the defeat of her city because of the vision of her people. They did not just see the mighty Israelite army, but they literally recognized and feared the awesome presence of God with them. They did not have to lift a finger to breach the walls of Jericho, only to shout the praise of God when the city was theirs. This is the proper vision. This is seeing things as God sees them, feel, not in process. Joshua 2:9-12. And as she said to the men, I know that Adonai has given you the land. Dread of you has fallen on all of us and all the inhabitants of this land, and they're melting in fear before you. For we have heard how Adonai had dried up the water of the Sea of Reeds before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no spirit remained anymore in anyone because of you. For Adonai, your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. So now please swear to me by Adonai, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's house and give me a true sign. Of course the spies covenanted with her, and she with them, ultimately becoming an Israelite, being a progenitor of the Messiah. Her vision as she spied out the land revealed the greatness and undefeatedness of God and his people as they come out of a situation no one thought it could come out of, but God brought them through. She could place her faith and trust in this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when God's people harden their hearts to the voice of God, they become wanderers in the wilderness, journeying without real direction, continually looking back on their lives to all the better opportunities they possessed before they agreed to live for God. They continually grumble and complain because without that spiritual vision from God and his person, contentment cannot be found, nor courage to be able to live outside the norm as a true spy for Adonai. And it's true. When we have not the vision of God in our eyes, if we have not seen as God has seen us, if we continue to look at ourselves as we are, we will never be of use to God, and we will be stuck in the wilderness journey, circling the same ground over and over and over. And yes, he's faithful to not let our shoes wear out or our garments to fall upon us. But we will never enjoy and never attain that contentment, that real contentment, and that joy that he has waiting for us in that promised land, until we look past ourselves to see it as he sees it. When we do that, there's no more fear, there's no more worry, there's contentment, there's purpose, There's drive. There's all the things that take us forward in our walk with God, and none of the things that set us back. It doesn't mean that we will never have things that may slow us down, that may cause us to step back and think, because God will continually test us. God will continually throw things in our way in order to see if we will really hold on to Him, or we will try to hold on to it ourselves. And when we release it to Him, you notice we'll come through the other side. You notice the children of the rebellious generation enjoyed the benefits of the promised land. Why? Because they didn't have a mentality of a slave. They didn't have a mentality of bondage. They had never seen through that type of natural eye. All they had seen growing up was the power and the awesomeness of God. And therefore they were willing to walk wherever He said walk and take that land. His patience and mercy and His grace are always shown to us as He tests us. He will allow the world to consume those up that rebel, lest they continue to blaspheme His name among the world. But we are not to be like those Israelites who strove with God and man, failing to overcome their flesh, being condemned to perish in the wilderness, never to set foot or to see that promised land. No, we are to remember who we are, seeing ourselves as God sees us, His conquerors, joined to Messiah eternally, never knowing true defeat because death has been redeemed from us in Him. There are no words or nothing that we can encounter that should stop us or hinder us. We are to exhort one another like Caleb and Joshua, who reminded their brethren of the awesomeness of their God and the truthfulness of His word. How could one doubt that victory would not be theirs? For in Hebrews 3:7-14, therefore just as the Ruach HaKodesh says, today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion, on the day of the testing in the wilderness. There your fathers put me to the test, though they saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was provoked by this generation, and I said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. And I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brothers and sisters, that none of you has an evil heart of unbelief that falls away from the living God. Encourage one another day by day, as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers and partners of Messiah, and if we hold our original conviction firm until the end, we shall make it to the other side. Not walking that land ourselves and seeing it for the glory of God, but seeing only the struggle or impossibility of the situation will paralyze the body from the furthering and the fulfillment of the Great Commission, and therefore hinders the return of our Lord. Just think that if those spies had brought that same report as Caleb and Joshua back to the people, they would be firmly established in their will to fulfill what God had commanded them. Where would the nation of Israel be now, and how much sooner would the Messiah have come the first time, and also how much sooner would it have affected His return? You know what hinders the Lord from coming back? People. His people. Not the world. The world's already condemned, but don't make no difference. Their fate is set. They don't come to faith in the knowledge of the saving grace of our Lord Yeshua. They have an eternal destiny. It's already promised. Hell. Separation from God. But it's God's people who hinders God. Isn't it funny how God's people hinders God? How can we be His people if we hinder Him? He probably hates us more than He does the lost. They'll never get it. I send them prophets, I send them teachers, I send them all these people. I buy them books, send them to school. But they lose sight of what I've told them. They lose sight of the truth. They lose sight of the vision. I am with you always, even unto the very end of the age. Nothing can harm you. Nothing can separate you from the love of God because it is with you. It is part of your DNA once you have come to Him in that respect and become part of Him. Nothing can separate you from Him. Death cannot separate you from Him. Now, fear the one who can destroy your body. Fear the one who can destroy you in the second death. Why? There is no resurrection from it. This is the Israelites. They've been resurrected out of the death of bondage and slavery. They are going into life, into a promised land. And all they have to do is follow God. All they have to do is believe that God will give it to them. All they have to do is do what He tells them to do. And He's right there with them. He's leading the way. Column of cloud, pillar of fire. They can actually see Him leading. That would be better if we just died in Egypt. Oh my God. We ain't got no pheasant. We ain't got no water. We're going to die. Human nature. Human nature. So what if you die? God's with you, right? Where's God? Doesn't it say absent from the body, present with the Lord? So does that mean you're really dead? We fail to see these things. We fail to keep these things in focus. And this is the biggest hindrance in the body today, is we fail to see the truth of what God has told us. I have given it to you. It is finished. We're like the army that comes in behind the main combat troops that have taken the ground. We mop it up. We get the stragglers. But we're so busy fighting among ourselves because we don't have everything we ought to have. We hinder ourselves. It's ridiculous. No wonder God wanted to destroy them all. I'll start with you, Moses. Don't you know that scared him to death? He's 80 years old and God says, I'm going to make a nation out of you. They would scare any man past the age of 60. He was 120 when he made it to the other side of the land again. You understand that? Caleb was 80 years old when he went into the land that God had promised him. 80 years old. And he crossed that sea, said, I am well able to take this land, went to the highest ground in the land, and captured it. 80 years old. Didn't need anything. No supplements. Didn't need Medicaid. He had God aid. He had faith that God would give him what He promised him. God said, Caleb and Joshua will settle that land and they will enjoy the promise that I had given their fathers. And they did. In fact, their descendants still live in that very area of the land to this day, because of the faithfulness of Caleb and Joshua. Who are our Caleb and Joshua? Who are the ones that will remind us to keep our vision? Don't lose sight of who you are in Messiah. Remember who we are in Messiah. Death may take us, yes, but we are counted as sheep for the slaughter daily. Why? Because He was counted as a sheep for the slaughter. Yet, though He died, He yet lives. And no one can ever take it from Him, because He has the power of life and death in His hand. And if we belong to Him, can anyone take our life or death from us? No. This is the power that we have within us. This is the light, the vision we should have. When He says, see the land yourself. Look at what I have put before you. Shelach Lecha. Look at it yourself. Gaze upon it. But don't look at it in your eyes. Look at it through my eyes. And you'll never falter. And when you do, you will be quick to come back to where I won't hold wrath against you. Does that know what He says? Even when we fall and stumble, come back to me. Why? Because He understands. But we just need to come back and tell Him, Lord, give me that vision for you again. Let me see life as you see it. Let me see my purpose that you have for me as you would have me to see it. And it is discouraging Life can be very discouraging. It can be like the journey in the wilderness. We may not have all those things we think we need in order to succeed in what God has called us to do. But that's the trick of the whole thing. That's what makes it God and not us. It's the fact that he can take us and we become like MacGyver. You remember MacGyver? He could have a pencil, a paper clip, a rubber band, and a pocket knife and make a nuclear bomb. Okay? The Holy Spirit within us is like MacGyver, you know? Though we may not have everything we need to do everything that he has called us to do, he is the one that is ultimately responsible to make it happen. And see, as Jewish people, this was our responsibility from the beginning. We were called out to be the MacGyvers for God. But we failed. Not all of us failed. There's Caleb, there's Joshua, there's Moshe. And even he messed up at the end. Then you have Samuel. You have all the other ones that have written, the prophets and so on. But the bottom line is, God is the one that brings it to pass. All we have to do is follow. All we have to do is be obedient. And walk where he has told us to walk. And look at it through his eyes. And when we do, we will be greatly blessed. We will send ourselves out as the spies to journey the land he has given us. We will prepare our hearts and minds for just what we might have to endure. How? Through prayer, meditation, and his word. That's what keeps us focused on him. And it doesn't, anything that comes our way will change the obvious victory that is ours because of the one who declared that victory at Calvary. It is finished. The land is ours. No one can remove us from it or conquer us in it, as Adonai is our help and our shield. Therefore, as we are sent, let us go confidently and excitedly into the fray, knowing that he is with us always, even and up to the day of his return, because the victory was already his to begin.